Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the key to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where you plan ahead to ensure that you understand the PMBOK guide. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. Plan scope management is the focus of this lesson. We learn what is important to be included in the scope management plan and how the plan defines, validates and controls scope. So in this lesson we will explore the key benefits of what goes into the plan, delve deeper into how the plan is used to analyze the project charter, discuss elements of the scope management plan and explore the components used in the requirements management plan. The plan scope management process is the foundation that will help guide us through the scope creation process to ultimately make sure that we deliver the product that the client wants and needs. This process is part of the project scope management knowledge area, and its official definition is that project scope management includes the processes required to ensure that the project includes all the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. And to do that successfully, you want to plan, collect, define, create, validate, and control your scope, which happen to be the 6 processes that are part of project scope management, which is what we're going to take a look at next. So the first process in the knowledge area is plan scope management, the process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the project scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. Once we have a plan, we can go ahead and we start executing on the plan. And our first step in project scope management is to collect the requirements, which is the process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet project objectives. Then we move on to define scope. This is the process of developing a detailed description of the project and product. At this point, our scope is planned, collected, and defined. We need to move on to creating the WBS, validating the scope, and then controlling the scope, which of course are the next 3 processes. Create WBS, or create work breakdown structure, is the 4th process in this knowledge area. It's the process of subdividing your project deliverables and project work into smaller, more manageable components. Then we move on to validating the scope, the process of formalizing acceptance of completed project deliverables. And finally, we need to control the scope as well, the process of monitoring the status of the project and product scope and managing changes to the scope baseline. In this way, we make sure that we only deliver what we said we would deliver. And here's our overview of the processes in this knowledge area and into which process group that they fall. Well, I'm not actually showing you the process groups yet, because when you think of project scope management, you'd think that, well, this is the knowledge area where our scope is also built, where we create it so that we can, in the end, deliver it to our customer. Well, far from it. Project scope management only concerns itself with planning how we build the scope and also monitoring and controlling, making sure that it is built the way it was supposed to be built. The actual building happens in project integration management. Anyway, the first process here is plan scope management. This process will produce a scope management plan and a requirements management plan, which both become subsidiary plans to the project management plan. So the lesson and the process focus on what is needed to ensure that we deliver the customer the product, service, or result that they asked for. So let's take a closer look what we do in the process. And I've pretty much already explained the main concept of this process, which is how we ensure delivery of a product, service, or result that meets the expectations of the customer. In plan scope management, we describe how we're going to define our project scope. We document how we will later on validate that that scope satisfies the customer requirements, and we make sure that we have a plan to control the requirements and make sure that we deliver the scope and only the scope that has been defined via the project management plan. Let's look a bit deeper into the key benefits of the plan scope management process. So in the initiation process, we created a project charter. In plan scope management, we elaborate on that charter and help further define the requirements. The plan that we build here helps us put structure around how we manage our scope. It guides us so that we can keep our scope in check throughout the life cycle of the project, and the plan will keep us focused on delivering the right products and provides a process for controlling the scope throughout the project lifecycle. Let's review the ITTOs, the inputs, tools and techniques of the plan scope management process by looking at the figure here from our PMBOK guide. Plan scope management occurs early in the project lifecycle and may have several iterations as you go through the plan, as you go through the project. We notice that there are just 4 inputs, 2 tools and techniques, and 2 outputs. And these 2 outputs from the process, they will become key inputs to future processes. Let's take a look at these 8 items in detail. We begin, of course, with our inputs, and we have 4 of them. There is the project management plan, there is the project charter, the enterprise environmental factors, and the organizational process assets. And remember what I said on the previous slide. I said this process happens early on in the project life cycle. So it's not surprising that we have a smaller number of inputs here, only 4 of them. After all, it's early on in the project, so we haven't really created all that much yet that we could use. And they're more the generic inputs, shall we call them, the project management plan, the project charter, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. They're more generic. They define the surroundings that we have in our project. That's why we have these here. The project charter is going to be your key input in developing the scope management plan. The project charter was created during the initiation phase of the project and provides several key elements to us here. The project charter is a source for much of the content that goes into creating our scope management plan. The project charter provides a high-level description of what the project is all about. What is that product, service, or result that we're going to build? And it also includes characteristics of that product that was used to create the scope of work, which is included in the project charter, high-level scope of work. These characteristics will be used to clarify what will be produced. Now let's take a look at the other inputs to plan scope management. The project management plan and any of these subsidiary plans that go into it will influence how we create the scope and will help determine how we plan and manage project scope throughout the life of what we're doing here. The enterprise environmental factors, they can influence the plan and include information on organizational culture, infrastructure, resources, and marketplace conditions, and any other factors that might impact on how we plan scope management. And lastly, the organizational process assets, like policies and procedures and historical information from other similar projects, can help shape our scope management plan. Maybe there's even a scope management plan from a previous project somewhere in a template library. Using all of these inputs helps us make sure that our scope management plan in the end is going to be in line with all the important aspects that help us define our scope. There are two key tools and techniques used to help develop the components that make up a scope management plan and a requirements management plan. At this stage of the process, we draw on the use of expert judgment from stakeholders, subject matter experts, team members, and any interested party that can contribute to how we determine, validate, and control scope. You may even go back to another project manager who's managed a previous similar project and find out how they did it, what they put into their scope management plan and requirements management plan. And we solicit input from our experts by conducting meetings that are focused on the elements that are going to be contained in the scope management plan and in the requirements management plan. And as a result of taking our 4 inputs and combining them with the 2 tools and techniques of expert judgment and meetings, we are going to end up with 2 outputs. But these outputs are very important in building a strong foundation for how we address scope throughout the project lifecycle. The scope management plan is going to become a subsidiary plan of the project management plan, and it describes how we will define, develop, monitor, control, and verify our scope. The requirements management plan will also become a subsidiary plan of the project management plan. It describes how we will analyze, document, and manage requirements. It looks at the relationship between components to ensure that each relationship presents the best possible outcome. Well, let's look closer at both of these outputs. The scope management plan contains key elements that make it useful as a major input when we develop the project management plan. These elements help the project team in managing scope in several areas. First of all, helps prepare a detailed project scope statement out of the scope that was identified in the statement of work and project charter. And let's just be absolutely clear. The detailed scope statement is not part of our scope management plan. But in the scope management plan, we describe how we will later on develop that detailed scope statement. It's the same with the next item. It helps us establish a process for creating the WBS from the project scope statement, and it also gives us a process how the WBS will be approved and maintained. The WBS itself is not part of the plan, but in the plan we describe a process of how we get there. We also specify the process of how you will gain formal acceptance of the project deliverables, and we determine how change requests to the detailed project scope statement will be handled through the Perform Integrated Change Control process. Again, the plan that we have here, the scope management plan, defines a process for change control. Our second output is the requirements management plan, which addresses how project requirements are going to be managed. It gives us the plan, it gives us the process for this. It looks at the relationships between project elements and documents, the approach to be applied to each element. And components of this requirements management plan include things like how we will plan, track, and report on the requirements activities, how we ensure that the product configuration management activities properly control the way we manage change to the project, and that these changes are properly reviewed and approved at the appropriate authorization level, how we properly prioritize requirements, how we measure the product, and the metrics we use to ensure that the product conforms to the requirements that were defined at the beginning of the project, and how we will establish a traceability structure that adequately captures the requirement attributes that we will use in the requirements traceability matrix. And even though the development of the scope management plan and the requirements management plan is an important step on your project, that's pretty much all there is to say about them. So let's review. During this lesson, we identified that the purpose of the plan scope management process is to help us describe the processes of how we will define, validate, and control scope. We discovered that the project charter and statement of work are used as a basis to then further define the scope in more detail. We examined more closely how the scope management plan helps us define a more detailed scope statement, how we create and manage the WBS, how the product will be formally accepted, and how we will use change control to manage changes in scope. And finally, we looked at the components of the requirements management plan, which determines how we will plan, track, and report on requirements activities, manage the product configuration, use metrics to make sure that the product meets the requirements, and establish the attributes used in the requirements traceability matrix. And to close out this lesson, here is a sample exam question for you that you may find in a book or an online simulator. The question reads, which output from plan scope management is linked with the perform integrated change control process? Is it A, the project scope statement? Is it B, the requirements management plan? Is it C, the scope management plan? Or is it D, the requirements traceability matrix? To find the correct answer to this, you first have to realize that, well, this process only has two outputs. The project scope statement, A, is not one of our two outputs, and D, the requirements traceability matrix, is also not one of the outputs from this process. Only B and C are really outputs from the process. So it's only a question of selecting the right one there. And the correct answer is that it's C, the scope management plan. Why is that so? Well, the scope management plan contains a process to control how requests for changes to the detailed project scope statement will be processed, and the actual execution of this process isn't done here in project scope management. It's done over in project integration management, to be precise, in the perform integrated change control process. And with that, we have come to the end of this lesson. So it's time for Justine to say,
I need to scoot.
And it's until next time from me.